It was Edmund Burke, who lived in the 18th century, who said, "Those who don't know history are destined to repeat it." Many others agreed, amongst them Winston Churchill, and I think it's so true. But I would like to add, those who don't know astrology will never understand the underlying patterns of history, patterns that also shape our time. And that is why I love history, seen through the eyes of astrological cycles and planetary patterns. I know that students of astrology are always most interested in all kinds of information that helps them to understand their own chart. Workshops on the astrology of relationships, for example, are always full booked, and I understand that. But focusing too much just on the individual chart makes that we tend to forget that we live in a certain time, in a certain zeitgeist of which we are part and in which we participate. It is influencing us more than we think, and in our turn, our collective reactions are shaping our time. Once you start studying history, zeitgeist, collective reactions, and the outer planets in the signs and their mutual astrological patterns and cycles, you will not only broaden your horizon, but will also understand the very situation our society is in, and what might develop in the near future. Understanding the patterns is a tremendous help to focus on solutions in general and to focus on what is most important for you in a certain historical period. And for us nowadays, to understand at a deeper level the instability of our time makes that we will not be caught by the prevailing anxieties and fears. Just an example to show how important collective patterns are for your individual life. In 2010, we had a T-square of Saturn, Uranus and Pluto, in the middle of a very severe financial crisis. We have seen the same T-square in recent history also in 1930 and 1875, both times also in the middle of severe financial crisis. The T-square is felt not only in the year mentioned, but about 1 to 2 years before and after. Robert Zoellick, president of the World Bank in 2010, said at that moment that the global financial system may have reached a tipping point, which he defined as the moment when a crisis cascades into a full-blown meltdown and becomes extremely difficult for governments to contain. We have looked into the abyss, but are we safe now? At that time, everywhere in the media one could read that nobody has seen this crisis coming. Nobody? As an astrologer, I already warned many years before that if the banks would not change their behavior, we would end up in a terrible crisis. And I was not the only astrologer warning. Why? Because what the banks did before the crisis was exactly the same what the banks had done before the two other crises of 1873 and 1929, the years of the T-square. Now, if you had known this, you would have been in a much better position to take decisions. In the recent crisis, people lost their jobs, their pensions, their houses. And no matter how perfect your Jupiter aspects were, selling your house for a price that was normal before the crisis was simply not possible anymore. So many daily life situations were influenced by what happened in the world, and what happened was reflected in the astrological patterns. Knowing and understanding them means that we also can think about how to navigate those times. Those who don't know history are destined to repeat it, as Edmund Burke said. Understanding the patterns is a powerful help not to repeat the same mistakes. Most astrologers are focusing on the upcoming triple conjunction of Jupiter, Saturn and Pluto, And yes, this is not an easy conjunction, as it is a phase in which things end. The planets involved can even point to destructive tendencies. When this triple conjunction hits your chart, you will be even more sensitive to what is going on in the world. Many people have a feeling of doom, and I have heard many people having feelings as if the end of the world is near. Is this just something that belongs to this triple conjunction? Although it certainly is an important phenomenon in heaven, my historic research has led me to something bigger that is going on. If you are watching the news of the last couple of years, you will have seen many different things going on in the world, and just to mention a few. We hear about Ebola in Africa, sanctions against Russia and Iran. We heard about decapitations by ISIS terrorists of the Islamic State. We heard about droughts in some areas of the world and heavy rain in other areas and very cold winters in parts of the US. We hear about China becoming more and more a dominant player in the world. We read about problems in the financial world, state debts higher than ever, and trade wars, etc. As it is like the world is on fire. All these events seem to be unrelated. But maybe, on a deeper level, all these events are, in a certain sense, related, more than it seems at first glance. The book 1177 BC, the year civilization collapsed, was researched and written by Professor Eric Klein. His research showed that the combination of events came together in what he called the perfect storm, and this storm set off the collapse of the Bronze Age civilization in a couple of decades. Klein's work reveals eerie parallels between the end of the Bronze Age and today's 21st century. I compared the events and situations of that perfect storm with what is going on in our time, and I looked at the astrological patterns of that time and our time. The result was breathtaking. The similarities are striking, but nothing in history and in astrology is repeating itself in exactly the same way. So what is the difference between then and now? And how can astrology help us to navigate this difficult time? I would love to share with you my findings about how in our time the perfect storm is building and where we have to look for solutions. I will explain everything in my webinar The World at Crossroads, the end of the Bronze Age as a message for our time, on August 25, 2019. See you there!